Hi everybody. My name is Kate Edelstein. I'm the Career Development Ambassador for the College of Education. This is EDWeek 2020 online. So I'm going to be presenting resume writing workshop. This is for specifically written towards educators, but honestly, a lot of this is just kind of generic advice that's going to be helpful for really any field. So if you're kind of bouncing around and looking at different places too, I think this will be overall helpful. For those of you that are here right now, if you can just please private message me your ID number in the chat window, just so I can verify who is here. That would just be helpful just for our documentation. So I'm just gonna give this a couple more, another minute or so here before we jump in, just to make sure that everybody is able to log in and is here. And then, yeah, we'll just jump through. Great, thank you guys. And also just so you guys are aware too, so I'm gonna give some room at the end for questions. So feel free to type them throughout if you'd like to. But I am gonna make sure that I leave enough space at the end just in case anybody has any specific questions about resume building for themselves that would be useful. All right, guys, so I'm gonna go ahead and jump in here now. All right, so just off the bat, let's just talk for a second about what a resume actually is. So a resume is basically just a document that's going to tell an employer about you to get you an interview. A resume is not to get a job. It's the first step. You want to give your resume out basically as like a marketing document for yourself. So this document is going to tell employers why they should pick you to come in to talk to you a little bit further. And that's really important to think about because in general, and you might have heard this before, a resume is something that's supposed to be fairly short. It's going to be about a page long, occasionally up to 2 pages, but you really want to try to keep it to a page. And the reason for that is that once you get into that interview, once you're face to face, that's when you can really start going in depth with things. But this resume is something that's a little bit shorter that's just going to give you the bullet points of who you are and shows why you're a qualified potential employee for this company. And something to keep in mind too is a little bit from this next question. So just, if you can real quick, just type in the chat what you think the answer to this question is. On average, how long do employers spend looking at a resume? All right. I'm just gonna take a look at the chat here real quick. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of C's, a lot of A's, 30 seconds, 20 seconds. But actually, the correct answer to this question is 6 seconds. On average, an employer will spend 6 seconds looking at a resume. That is next to nothing. So that is something you really, really want to keep in mind when you're writing a resume, that you make sure that whatever is on there, it's clear, it's concise, it's easy to digest, because that is going to be about the amount of time someone's going to actually spend looking at this. So just so you guys know, there's 3 different kinds of resumes. What we're going to be focusing here is chronological. I think it's about 80% of employers, I think higher honestly at this point, that are looking at chronological resumes. So chronological resumes are more focused on experience. A functional resume is something that you might have seen before. So this is a little more focused on skills. So you're going to see the skills expanded, and all of the experience is going to be kind of short bullet points. Chronological is basically the opposite. You're going to expand on your experience, and then, all the skills are going to be kind of more bullet pointed. A combination is exactly as the name suggests it is. It's just both. But in general, you really just want a chronological resume. That's in general what people are looking for. That's in general what most resumes look like. And once again, going back, and I'll keep bringing this up, that 6 seconds that's going to be dedicated to looking at your resume roughly, you want to make sure that what employers consider as important is going to be shown on there. And a lot of employers consider your experience to be the most important thing. So where do you start in writing a resume? Well, the first thing you could do, especially if you've never written a resume before, if you don't really, have too much on there, is just taking stock of your skills. Take stock of your qualification, of your education, of your training. Just remember though, it's okay to talk yourself up. And this is something that I see a lot working with students. There's this desire almost not to talk yourself up, you know, in this place. And your resume is the exact place that you want to do that. You want to sound like you're the best possible candidate because that's what you're doing. You're selling yourself. And this is a good place to do that, especially if you're kind of new to the game. If you haven't been in this field for too long, your resume is going to be a little bit shorter. You're not going to have as much information there. So it's really good to be able to sort of look at some of the things that you've done and see if that's something that could translate to a resume. Like, for example, if you worked on a committee that chose like t-shirt designs, you might be thinking, well, that, you know, it wasn't that serious. That was just something really basic. But that is impressive. You worked in a team. You worked on something that's going to be long lasting. You made decisions that affected the entire organization. So little things like that you might not think are that serious might actually be something really beneficial for you to put onto a resume. So this is for physical resumes, which I know right now is less of a thing to really be thinking about, but still important, you know, just for when things might go back and just in case you ever are sending in a regular resume that's on a printed piece of paper. You want to make sure you're using either like white or off-white or gray paper, probably white though for the most part. You want to make sure that the font you're using is readable, like kind of keep that same mentality for when you're writing essays, like Times New Roman, Arial, avoid Comic Sans. You want to also try to keep the fonts either 10 or 12. Once again, just make sure that it's readable, digestible, easy to understand, easy to get through. And make sure, and this is very important, both on physical and on resumes that you're doing online, that the formatting is the same throughout because it's easiest on the eyes, it's easiest to read. You don't want to confuse the reader. And formatting online resumes. So the main thing to really point out here is that when it comes to saving documents, there's so many different options for doing this, but PDFs are going to be your best bet. Sometimes you might be asked for something else, and if that's the case, then do whatever the employer is asking. But overall, a PDF is going to be the best thing, and that is because the formatting is not going to change when you send it in. So if you're using like Google Docs or something, for example, and you download it and send it, that might mess up your formatting. It's not readable. You might be the best candidate for this position. You might have all the experience, but your formatting is just so awful. They're not even going to read past, you know, your name. So you want to make sure that whatever you're sending in is something that's not going to be messed up just when somebody else opens it on a different type of computer. You want to also make sure too, it's simple. It's easy to read. Once again, just going back to that, you don't want anything too over the top, too flowery. Try to avoid templates if you can. And this is for two big reasons. And I'm going to go into the ATS a little bit on the next slide. But there's something called the applicant tracking system. Some of you guys might already be aware of this. It's used in a lot of companies and organizations and districts, places basically where, you know, you might be having a lot of resumes coming through. Instead of having an HR person or somebody read every single resume, it goes through a piece of software first. And different organizations use different ATS, so it's not always the same software. So there's not like a one size fits all. But things to keep in mind with this software is it can be very easily confused. So going simplistic is a lot of times going to be the best thing you can do. The other reason why you might not want to use a template is because some employers will actually just request that you copy resumes into the body of emails. Those of you who might have applied on Indeed.com, for example, a lot of times that's a thing where they ask you just to go ahead and copy and paste your resume directly into that. And if you have a template, that is just going to mess up the formatting. It's going to frustrate you. It's going to be basically like rewriting that resume over and over again. So having a PDF is just a better idea. It's easier to save, and making sure you have a base resume too makes that a lot easier. So you can have a base resume that you save on your Google Docs that you copy and paste pieces when you need it. But that way, when you are trying to apply to multiple jobs that might have different expectations, for example, you're not having to struggle trying to change the formatting every single time. So just looking at the applicant tracking system in general, here's just a list of some do's and some don'ts for your resume. So do, use industry and job description keywords. And one of the reasons for that, once again, talking about this ATS system, is it looks for things that are going to fit the best. Like think kind of how Match.com works, right? It looks at the answers that people are giving and tries to find another person who likes those same things, who likes those same words, who likes those same activities. The ATS is the match.com for resumes, basically. So what's happening here is it's looking for words that have put in that might already be in a job ad, for example. So if you're looking at a job ad that says they're looking for somebody who's instructed, but you use a different word on your resume, go back to your base resume, make one for this job, and use the word they're using, because the more keywords that you have that match the job ad, the more likely the ATS is going to pick your resume to actually be read by a real person. So don't use flowery language with that considered. Like, instead of saying, you know, teaching or taught, don't be like, I established blossoming knowledge in my students. That's great, and you can describe it that way if you want, perhaps in an interview, but don't do that in your resume, because that's probably not going to be one of the keywords that ATS is looking for. So another do, write out and use acronyms. If you're going to use an acronym, make sure you write it out. So for example, in your education, you always want to be able to do this: California State University, comma, Long Beach, and then in parentheses, CSULB. And after that, you can use it throughout the resume. It's totally fine, but make sure you're describing what that means first. And also too, it's good as well to also use acronyms. So I'm not saying don't use them at all, just make sure you describe them, because the acronym could be something that's inside the ATS is looking for as well. So do use bolding and underlining, because one main reason why that's good is it kind of helps with the eye for looking for things, because eventually this resume, if it does get through the ATS, is going to be read by somebody. So it is helpful to be able to separate and differentiate that way. But don't be using like borders, don't put pictures on there, don't be like using bright colors, because those are the things that are going to confuse the ATS, and you might just have your resume thrown out and never looked at. Including your location, it's another thing. ATS a lot of times is going to look for like geographical locations, but you don't need to include your full address. And one of the reasons for that is just thinking about mailing, you know, or emailing out your resume. If it has your full address on it, like, you never know, especially if you're applying on sites somewhere maybe like Craigslist, like there's only so much information you really need to give out. So why give out more than you need to? They're mostly just going to be interested in your city. And then once again, make sure you're sending a PDF. Try not to send, you know, Word, Google Doc, etc., unless specifically asked for. So what goes on to a resume? So these are generically, this is just pretty much going to be on every resume, these sections here. There's other, you know, sections you can put on there, but in general, you're going to see your contact information first. Potentially an objective and a summary. The reason why I highlighted that is that they're kind of falling out of fashion. They're not necessary, just something to keep in mind. Education is always going to be on there. Your skills are going to be on there, and your experience is going to be on there. And the way that you're going to order this is going to kind of depend on what you really have to bring to the table. So you're always going to have your contact information first. If you have an objective, you're going to have that next. But, you know, whether you put your education or your skills or your experience first after that is going to kind of depend on what you have to offer. If you've just graduated and your education is the biggest thing you have to offer, then that should go first. If you have a degree in a field that's unrelated to what you're doing, but you have a lot of work experience in this field, then put your work experience first. All right, so now I'm going to do an activity real quick with you guys, and I really want to kind of drive back, you know, home that 6 seconds that I mentioned, right? So I'm going to give you guys 6 seconds here to look at this next slide, and I want you to type into the chat bar what information you see on this resume, kind of based on what I've been saying so far. All right, here we go. Okay, Elise, can you read off anything that you see there that anyone said? Or Jared?
Full address was posted. Middle school teacher. I saw that too the first time. Bullet points. Master's degree. Master's biology. Middle school science teacher. A lot of people saw the middle school science teacher.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so you guys pulled out a lot of really important information from that. All right. So next, I'm going to have you guys do that one more time with one other resume. Same thing, just type what you see in the chat bar. And here we go. Okay. So what did you guys notice this time?
Online kids, picture and name, the photo, ESL teacher, online teacher, what is teaching equipment for, China.
Yep, yeah, all true. All right. And then one more question for you guys. Out of those two resumes, the first one or the second one, which was easier for you to digest important information from? The first or the second? Okay. And then can I get some, let's see, I just clicked on the chat myself. So yeah, the first, everyone kind of resoundingly, I'm hearing the first one. The second one was overwhelming. Yes, that is exactly how I would describe that. So just to jump back here really quickly. So this first resume, the summary, very simplistic, very easy to read. It's almost written like it's bullet pointed, even though it's not. The font is very easy to read. Everything is separated reasonably. It's easy to see what the skills are. It's easy to see where they worked. They bolded the name of their position so everyone saw middle school science teacher, because that's something very important that they wanted to put forward, that that's what they have experience in. Their education is written very simplistically. Everything you need is on here in a very basic sense. The second resume though, I mean, even just looking at this summary, you can't read this in 6 seconds. It's not really possible. It's long, it's kind of winded. There's a picture in here, which I already said is not something you really want to do. There's no reason to have a photo. You're not applying to be a model. There's no reason to have this for any application that's going to be in the education field. Also, just kind of jumping through here too, nothing's really separated. It's hard to see what her positions were. Nothing has any bullet points in it. So it's kind of all just blended together as this one big bulking thing. And it's not a bad resume, and that's not what I'm trying to get across here. There's nothing wrong with anything that's put in here. This is a fine resume, but it's not a great resume. And when you're applying for a job, the chances are there's only one person who's going to get hired. And you don't want to have the okay resume. You want to have the great resume. So try to take those things into consideration and make sure that your resume is easy to digest. Because if this resume was going to the same place as that other resume, which one would you choose? Which one would you take more time digesting? And which one would you feel overwhelmed, like somebody said? So these are just things to kind of keep in consideration as we go through the rest of this, because you want to really make sure when you are putting yourself onto a piece of paper, you're doing it in a way that's easily digestible. All right, so let's just go through what goes onto a resume just step by step. So contact information, that is always going to be the first thing. That is the top of your page. It's going to have your name, it's going to have your email address, it's going to have your phone number, and it's going to have your city and state every time. One little thing I will say, I recommend having your name a little bit bigger in font so it kind of stands out. You can also bold it too. Just make sure when you do this though, you're being very considerate to what your email address is, for example. So if you're using the same email address from, your first day of undergrad and it's partygirlplayer420@hotmail.com, don't put that onto your resume. Get another email address. Make one that's just your first and full name with your, date of birth or something like that. Something that's very simplistic and just has your name on it, because that looks a lot more professional. And just think in the sense too of, this is the first thing they're going to find out about you is going to be this information to the top of the page. So if your email address is something not professional, why are they going to bother to see anything else on the rest of that page? Also, with that in mind, when you're leaving your phone number, make sure that your voicemail is also professional. You want to make sure if you don't pick up the phone, don't just bank on the fact that you'll hopefully pick up if they call you back. Check your voicemail, make sure it's professional, make sure it gives the information that you want it to have on there, and also has the name that you have on your resume. So if you go by a different name, but your resume does not have that on there, that might create some confusion. So just take that into consideration when you're making your voicemail before applying to jobs. So this is just kind of like a basic one. So we have a need a job here, work site, California, zip code, phone number, and then an abbreviation of the name at email.com. Simplistic, to the point, that's all you want to have. Simplistic and to the point is basically the best you can do when it comes to a resume. All right, and then the objective. So once again, too, with the objective, this is not always necessary. If you're struggling to get to a page for your resume, for example, I would put it in there. Or if you're applying for multiple positions within the same district, that might be a good reason to use an objective. They're not always necessary, but you know it's going to kind of just depend on you too and what your preferences are. So you just want to make sure that if you are going to use one, it's clear and it's simple and it states the job or position that you're interested in. So, you know, it's just going to be based on the job that you're seeking. So for the example I'm given down here is do a part-time position as a teacher's assistant. That's straight, that's to the point, it says what you're looking for. Do not put down something like to get a part-time position where I can gain experience and use my skills in education. Because one, that does not say to an employer what you're going to do for them. It says what they are going to do for you. And that's kind of a faux pas when it comes to resumes. But two, it doesn't really say anything at all. It's very generic, it's very basic. If you're going to do an objective, make sure it is objective. Summary of qualifications are used sometimes instead of an objective. So with that too, just kind of going back to those two that we looked at earlier, right? Those both use summaries. So the first one was very concise. It kind of almost was written in like a bullet point format, even though it wasn't bullet points. So it was easy to read in that way. And that's kind of what you would want to do when you're doing a summary as well. Don't make it like long and flowery like that second one was. So just be very straight to the point like you are with an objective. So, you know, 4 years experience working in the human services field, knowledge of psychoeducational instruments, currently enrolled in master's in school psychology program. Just make sure it's very basic and to the point once again. All right, so the next section is going to be your education section. And this is a big one, especially for all of you educators. So there's a few simple rules to make sure your education is clear and make sure that it's easily readable. The first thing you want to do is make sure when you're writing down what your major is, it's the full major. So you want to be able to do that. The best way is just to go to my CSULB and copy down the exact title of your degree, even if it's really long. Mine is really long, so I completely understand, you know, kind of that frustration sticking it in. But you don't want to make the assumption that an acronym you're using is well known for many reasons. One of the reasons is going to be going back to that applicant tracking system. That might not be something it's aware of. Another thing to even keep in mind too is a lot of times you're not going to have your resume looked at by another teacher. You're going to have your resume looked at by an HR representative, and they might not know all the acronyms. So these are just things to keep in mind when you're doing this. You can always, like I said earlier, put it into an acronym afterwards and continue to use that later on. Make sure too, inside that same, you know, train of thought, you want to fully spell out the name and location of the university. And that's not, you know, the entire address, just, you know, California State University, Long Beach, parentheses, CSULB, Long Beach, California. You also want to put your projected graduation date in this section. So even if you haven't graduated yet, a lot of times what I see when people have me review their resume is they'll put the date they started at the school, which is kind of like a dash, or say, you know, 2018 to present. That doesn't tell you really anything. People can go to school for 10 years, they can graduate in 2 years. So that's not really great information, because usually when an employer is looking at that, they want to know when you're going to be graduated, when can you start working. So you just want to put your projected graduation date, even if it's not 100%. So you can say projected May 2020 or expected May 2020, whatever you need to put down there if you haven't already graduated. So, well, I guess it is May 2020. So I guess let's move that to December 2020. Yes, so, and then also too, so GPA is the big question that gets asked pretty frequently to me. If it's impressive, put it on there. But it's not necessary. If you don't have your GPA on there, that's not really going to ding you. If you have something you want to kind of show off, like if you're like, you know, I got 3.8, I'm doing pretty good, I want this employer to know that about me, then put it on there. But be aware of what the average GPA is for your field. So, you know, if you're doing liberal studies versus if you're doing school counseling, know what looks good for that. So in general, you know, I'm going to say especially for educators, you know, if it's below like a 3.3, it's kind of maybe questioned at that point. If you want to show off, go ahead. If you don't, though, if you're uncomfortable and you don't think it's going to help you, then you don't need to put it on there, even if you're seeing it on other people's. So here's just an example of what this section could look like. So we have California State University, Long Beach, Bachelor of Arts, Liberal Studies, GPA 3.5, projected graduation spring 2020. It's not going to look exactly like this. You know, it's going to be obviously formatted onto a resume, but this is the way that you want to write out the words. So jump into skills. This section is going to be where you're going to spell out skills that are related to the position you are applying for. And that's very, very specific here. So you want to include languages that you might speak. If you're bilingual, that's really useful to have on here. Just make sure too, though, if you're mentioning if you're bilingual, you are very specific of the level that you have in this field or in this language. So for example, if you say that you speak French or you say you're proficient in French, make sure if you end up in an interview and they start speaking French to you, you're not going to embarrass yourself. Because if you say that you're proficient, you should hopefully be proficient. So if you can read it and not, you know, speak it, mention that. That's still useful information, but don't kind of push the boundaries here. Include any software you know too, and that's going to be particularly important now. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of us are thinking being at home, knowing how to teach over Zoom, knowing how to use Google Classroom, you know, things like that are going to be really useful for you to have on your skills section. You also want to include any equipment you can operate that might be important for this field, include any processes, practices, or standards you're familiar with. You can also kind of make this a combination with any certifications that you might have, for example. So if you're like CPR certified, that could be something in your skills section. Just make sure that when you're writing this section, you're being considerate of using hard skills and not soft skills. So a hard skill is everything I kind of just listed. That's going to be, you know, anything that's just like concrete that you can show that you know how to do, your languages, your software. A soft skill is something that's more generic and doesn't really say anything when you say something. So that's going to be like team player or leadership or, you know, great collaborator. And those things might be true. And that's great that you have those skills. But in general, when you're applying for something like this, they hope that you're a team player. They hope that you're good at taking directions, that you're prompted on time. That could be something that you can mention in your cover letter or something you can highlight when you get an interview. But remember, once again, the point of this document is to get you an interview. So if you're kind of using that flowery language, there's things that we love to say about ourselves, which are those basic, you know, I really am a good team player. Even if that's true, your resume isn't for that. There's other places where you can bring that up. So just take those things in mind when you're writing this section. So here's an example of a skills section right here. We have language, so fluent Japanese, conversational Spanish. So get very specific once again. Computer software, MS Office, and you could just say Office products. You don't have to say Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Access, unless you want to. Like you can't, you know, if you're trying to kind of bulk it up, you can go for it. But if you just want to sort of shorten it or you're trying to condense that resume, then go ahead and just say that. But yeah, you can mention Adobe products, Google Classroom, etc. Any sort of computer skills you might have. All right, and jumping into the bulk of it, your experience section, which is going to be very, very important, and you want to make sure you're taking a lot of consideration into this when you're writing it. So your experience section should have 5 pieces of information in it. In general, this is what's going to show. It's going to have the name of the company, school, or organization that you worked for, the location, so city and state, the dates that you worked there, your job title, and your job duties. And your job duties are going to be any specific things like mention of money, mention of access, how many students you had or looked over, supervision that you might have provided, any particular accomplishments that were very impressive for that particular job. So that's kind of going to be, you know, in the bulk of it. And just real quick too, and I might point that out in a little bit as well, make sure, you know, when it comes to your dates, that you're being consistent. And I mentioned that before throughout this, just make sure in general, when you are building a resume, that you're being consistent in your formatting. So if you say that you work somewhere from like May 2018 to June 2019, but then next you have, you know, 2-2011 to something else, just stay consistent because that takes the eye away from what you're saying. And go back to the 6 seconds again, because if you're taking any time away from what you're actually trying to put out there, it's time that you've lost. So just keep these things in mind when you're writing it. This is going to be the generics for your experience section. So elaborating a little bit on the duty statements. This is the general format that you're going to see these written in. So it's going to be did X using Y resulting in Z. So prepared spreadsheets using Microsoft Excel resulting in reduced error rate for the company. So you're just going to kind of use this format to discuss what you did while you were working. So I just want to give you guys a good example of a duty statement. So this is from a resume where this person was both a teacher and a research analyst. So if you look just kind of at how this is written out, you know, one, it's in bullet points. Two, you can see that they kept the formatting the same throughout. So we have October 2011 written out. We have mid-August 2008. It's in reverse chronological order, which you always want in your experience section. You're always going to start with your most recent job and you're going to go backwards. So first, just looking at research analysts, conduct quantitative and qualitative research and analysis on over 50 US industries, received top quality awards among group of 48 for 2 consecutive quarters. Look at that. That is very specific. It says exactly what they did. It says how many, where, why, when. That's the kind of stuff that you want to be talking about. Jumping down to the teacher portion too, which I know is very, very important and a little more interesting here. Plan curricula for 14 5-week courses, teaching pre-kindergarten through university level students writing, reading, grammar, and test preparation skills. Design lesson plans with attention to different learning styles. Example given, combination of individual and group work, interactive lessons such as acting out a book. So that was very straight and to the point. And what I really, really like about this duty statement is that it's able to be incredibly specific. It's able to say exactly how many, you know, where, why, when of what this person did, but it's not long, it's not bulky, it's not taking up a full paragraph. And that's something that's a skill that you really want to start working on when you're writing resumes, is figuring out a way that you can write something that's very concise, that is able to say this much at the same time. So here's an example of a bad duty statement, and I could not find one from a teacher, so we're just going to poke a little bit of fun here at an accountant instead. So I think off the bat here, it's pretty easy to see that the formatting is very jumbled. Nothing's really separated. It doesn't really help when you're looking at it. Everything's kind of pushed together, and there's no, you know, 2006 to present, when was that? What month did you work? Making sure that you're being very, you know, a little more specific than that. You don't need to know the exact date that you started somewhere, but you should at least be including the month. And then just looking at what they describe this with, there's no bullet points, but it's written like they're supposed to be. Assisted the director of accounting with accounts receivable. Prepared bi-weekly payroll journal entries. So all of this, you know, once again, is not terrible. There's still good information here. They're specific in a couple ways, you know, prepared bi-weekly payroll journal entries. That's useful, but it's not great. It doesn't look that good. And make sure that when you're writing a resume, you're writing a great resume, not an okay resume, because that's not what an employer is going to be looking for. So when you're also writing these two, in general, you can have as many sections as you want to, you know, as long as you're keeping on the page. So some other sections that you might see would be relevant coursework, projects, hobbies, awards, volunteer activities, affiliations, leadership, certifications. These are all things that can go on your resume. And kind of jumping back again to, you know, this is might depend on where you are in the field, where you are in your trajectory towards your career goals. Do you have a lot of experience or a little experience? If you don't have that much to put on your resume, that is when you might want to start looking at other options. So for example, if you are moving into this field from another field, which is very common in education. So let's say that, you know, you spent years of your life, I don't know, working in communications. So that's your background. That's what you've done before. It's a little related to your field, but it's not 100% related. So all of your experience is not that relevant. Being able to add in other things, like maybe projects that you worked on while you've been in school or getting a degree that are related to your field, that might be good to put on there, because whatever you're putting on your resume, you want to make sure it's something that's going to be valuable to an employer looking at it. And if all of your experience and all of your schoolwork so far hasn't really been relevant to your field, then kind of looking and getting a little creative with other things that you've done that are related, it can be really useful. So just take that into consideration when you're writing it. Also looking at these two, and this is something that I do want to just mention real quick because I feel like I get a question on this every time I do this workshop, is what's the difference between a CV and a resume? And kind of on, a short and basic way to look at it is your CV is sort of an extended out resume. Your resume is short, it's concise, it's, chronological or functional, as we discussed before. It has a specific set of things that go onto it that really focus highly on your work experience because it's for that type of job. So it's going to be short. When you do a CV, it's a lot more extensive. It's going to mention things like relevant coursework that you've done. That's going to be very important on there. There's no page limit on it. Honestly, if it's a little bit longer, that's pretty nice to have. The reason why I don't talk too much about CVs here, though, and the reason why it's really important to people to write a resume is most of the time, wherever you're applying, they're going to ask for a resume. The only time you're going to be asked for a CV in the education field is either if you're applying into graduate school, if you're applying for a higher education job, which is definitely, possible for many of you, or if you are applying for private schools, sometimes they might ask for a CV. So there's nothing wrong with having a CV, but make sure you have a CV and a resume. Because if you're being asked for a resume and you send a CV, imagine sending an 8-page document to someone who's going to spend 6 seconds looking at it. They're not even going to bother. So with a resume, just make sure if you are going to use some of these other sections, like I mentioned here, you're not kind of going past that 1-page, maybe 2-page limit. It's not, getting bulked up. Your hobby section is not going to be before your skills section. You just want to make sure that whatever you're putting on there is for a good reason. And my last bit of advice for all of you is to make sure you have your resume looked at by another set of eyes. So if you're feeling pretty good about your resume, you're thinking that it looks pretty nice, or you're just kind of uncertain about it, have some friends look at it, have a family or professor look at it. If you look over the same document 100 times, you're going to start missing typos. It's going to just look like letters on a page and stop even looking like a document to you. So ask someone else to look at it. Or, alternatively, as I mentioned, my role within the College of Education is I'm the Career Development Ambassador. I do offer help for students who are interested in having their resume looked over. I'm happy to help with resume edits. You can either book an appointment with me on this website right here. You can book.me, or you can just shoot me an email, send me your resume. I'm happy to look it over and talk to you about any job search questions you might have. All right, so I'm gonna leave the rest of this time here just to talk to you guys about any questions that you might have. Take a look at the chat. So thank you everybody who came through, who was interested in looking at all of this. And once again, feel free if you have anything a little bit bigger, maybe a little more personal you want to talk about, you can always just email me and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And then I also have included in here too, I'm pretty sure that no one's doing class things anymore, but just in case, if you ever need any proof of attendance, please do email me. Right. Okay, I'm just gonna look through some of these questions here. For ITEP, I'm not sure what the full name of that is. Once again, if you just go to my CSULB, unless either Jared or at least know the answer to this and you just want to jump in real quick, yeah, you just want to go ahead and maybe go to the my CSULB site. You should be able to click on it. It's going to say the full name of what your title is. So, and then for GPA, which GPA would we put? So, I mean, it just, it depends. So, one thing you can do, I have seen this, I've done this myself, I'm guilty of this in my undergrad, is you can always put what your major GPA is as opposed to your general GPA if it's a little bit higher, and that might be useful in this field. So feel free, go ahead and do that. And then listing the hard skills again. So I'll go, oh wait, I'm not on the slideshow anymore. Yeah, so hard skills are going to be, once again, something like you can put certifications on there if you want to, like CPR, nonviolent crisis intervention training, things like that. You're also going to put any software that any, like classroom management or any trainings that you might have had, that can go on that section. You can also put things like languages that you speak, once again, and that might include too, you know, depending on what your field or what you're going into, like if you're trying to do something that's computer science related, but in education, you might want to say like, you know, what software languages you speak to. So anything that's going to be kind of tangible that you can sort of put evidence to as a skill. So for example, like a language, you can kind of show very easily that you speak another language. It's a tangible, hard skill there. Team player is kind of a little more wishy-washy, as I was saying. That's not really any evidence for that. And that's going to be something kind of basic. So you also really want to make sure too, the skills that you're putting down are going to put you above other people. What if your foreign language level is low? Can you say something like basic level of French? Yes, you can. If you are going to say basic level of French, though, I would be very specific in what you mean by that. So for example, you know, if you can basic, maybe for speaking is basic, you know, conversational, you might want to say instead of basic. So you can say like conversational French. And you can always say too, if it's different between like reading and speaking, maybe you have conversational speaking French, but you also are able to, you know, you have an intermediate writing ability in French. So it might be a little bit different. You could always separate it too if it makes it look a little bit better. But yeah, if it's something really basic, just say conversational. How does that work if you've been a sub for a district from last year to present, but had jobs in between? So I'm thinking what you're asking here is like when the chronological aspect of it. So it's gonna, you know, basically if you're still working there, but you're not working at those other jobs, just put that first, because like where you're currently working is the most interesting part. So it's gonna kind of basically go by when your job ended, not when you started. So if you're still working somewhere, you're gonna put that first, even if you've been working there for 10 years. How do you mention where you worked in a school district if you worked at various school sites? Okay, so it's gonna kind of depend. This might be something actually if you want to send me like a resume if you're looking at that I can look at, because it kind of depends like what you did there. If, you know, for example, like if you, you know, had like a promotion somewhere, that would be something where you kind of like put it underneath like the same thing. But if you're working at different school sites, there's a couple ways that you could do that. So you could just like list like the district title and then kind of put down underneath that like the different schools that you worked at, like from when to when. And then if you have the same job duties, you can include it that way, or you can just separate them too. And that's also going to depend as well, like how expansive is your resume. If you're struggling to keep it down to one page, you might want to kind of bulk it in. But if you're like, that's the only thing you've ever done, you can kind of separate that too. So it's just going to kind of depend on the resume formatting that you have there. And then how is a cover letter different from an email of intent? So that's going to go down. So cover letter is not generic in the sense of like, you do want to be very specific when you're writing a cover letter, but it just depends what you're being asked for and what they're putting down and what they're asking from you. So if they're asking for a cover letter and a letter of intent or an email of intent, like the email is going to be a little bit more generic. A cover letter is like an actual letter. It's a lot more professional. It's going to have at the very top, you know, you're going to write it in a letter format. And I'm going to type this in right down here too, that if you go to the CSULB website, we have a careers section that's very, very helpful from the CDC. And they actually go through what cover letters are supposed to look like. You can look at examples for cover letters, and you can look at examples for resumes. And there's even specific resumes on there for the education field. So let me just go ahead and type the website here. And yeah, you're just going to click on students and go from there. And it'll show you how to write resumes and how to, what cover letters should look like too. All right. Is it okay to write different projects in a BA program, like developed a research paper on language acquisition of English language learner adult using APA formats? Yes, I mean, like it can be fine to do that. So you're going to do that in their like a project section. So if, that wouldn't be in your education section. You wouldn't put like underneath like, your degree title that you did this thing, but that would be a project. So just make a project section, even if it's only one thing, if you think it's really important and you think that it highlights something that an employer would be interested in, then you can totally just make that into a project section. Should it be 1 or 2 pages? 1 page, hopefully. You can't have it 2 pages. It doesn't always exactly matter, especially with a lot of good information. I had somebody send me a resume recently, and it was just, I could not help them get it down to 1 page. This is particularly true too. If you only have like 3 sentences on a second page, just make some edits, make it a little bit shorter. But in general, you really do want to try to keep it to 1 page, because like there are employers who won't even bother to read the second page. So if you do have 2 pages, at the very least, make sure the most important information you have to offer is going to be at the top. All right. If we are limited in space on our resume, would you still recommend we spell out long but common acronyms in education? Honestly, yes, I would. I really would. Yeah, you really want to make sure that you're writing that out, at least the first time that you mention it. If you're going to mention it repeatedly throughout, you can obviously start, mentioning MTSS as you mentioned in here. But the first time you mention something, I really do recommend that you write it out. The one, caveat that I could say for this is, for example, if you're applying for a position and in the job ad, it lists that as something they're interested in as the acronym. So if you see in the job ad, they're looking for somebody who like knows MTSS, then maybe that might be a time where you can like change from your base resume, like I was talking about, and kind of shorten it to 1 page by just turning that into the acronym. But kind of as a rule of thumb, you want to do that because like 1, like I said, you don't know who's reading this. They might not know that themselves. And 2, it's just professional. Even think when you're writing an essay, for example, if you're writing a research paper, you would never just put an acronym without writing out what that acronym meant. And it's kind of a similar thought process here, where it's just more professional to write it out. All right, I think I got all the questions I see on here. Thanks, Lise, for answering that one question. When is it okay to go beyond 1 page? Sorry, I missed that one. Yeah, this is gonna be, once again, too, like I hate answering this way, but it depends. But it does depend on a lot of different factors. So like I said, if you have like hobbies as a section, that is not a reasonable reason to have it go past 1 page. But if you are applying for a position, like let's say you're applying for like, a school counseling position, but they're looking for somebody who has experience teaching as well, and you've done both, and your just experience is like kind of broad enough from both fields, and it's kind of had to cause you to like expand your skills a little bit, you might have 2 pages. Also, it's going to depend a lot too on what's relevant in your field and what's relevant in that job ad. So like I said, my recommendation here in general really is you want to try to have a base resume, and your base resume might be 2 pages long. And that might be a resume where you're going to have your school counseling stuff and you're going to have your teaching stuff. And as you apply for different jobs, if you're applying for a teaching job that does not require anything from counseling, you can Frankenstein it together a little bit, take out the things that are unnecessary, and send out that 1 page resume with the information they're looking for. Because you shouldn't be sending out the same resume to every single position. I know it's easy and the burnout is real and it's frustrating to be applying over and over again, but you want to really try to make sure that your resume is fitting the job ad, and that's going to require you to do some edits every time you send it out. And usually at that point, it makes it a little bit easier to make it down to 1 page because not everything is relevant at that point. Education before experience, that's just going to depend on what your experience looks like. So I would say in general, for the education field, probably just put your education first. It's important that you have it. It's definitely very like high, should be highlighted. The only time I wouldn't really recommend that is like, which isn't really fitting for anybody who's here, but like, for example, if you're a substitute teacher and you didn't get your degree in anything related to education, you might want to put your experience first. Or, if you have a lot of experience, like for example, if you're applying to a school district you worked before and you have a lot of, great experience and references from there, that might be a time to put your experience before your education if that's what you're trying to highlight. But in general, particularly for this field, and particularly for people who are just graduating without that much related experience, you should put your education first. Any other questions anybody has? Is student teaching work experience? Yes. Yeah, that is experience. So that's gonna, yeah. So volunteer work, internships, and paid positions, those are all jobs. You can put all of those under your work experience. Just make sure that you specify that that's what you did. So like, for example, if it's student teaching, you don't want to put that you were a teacher and not mention that it was field work or student teaching. So just make sure, like in parentheses, for example, like for me, like I'm considered an intern in my field, so I'm gonna put that I'm a therapist, and I'm gonna put like trainee in parentheses. So that's something that you can do to kind of specify what you're putting inside of your experience section, so people are aware of the fact that it is something that is more of an internship slash field work. But that still counts as experience. You're still working. Even if they're not paying you for it, it doesn't mean that you're not working. So yes, that does go in your experience section. All right, guys, any other questions? I see we're getting towards the end here. I'm gonna go ahead and type in my email address again too, since I did take down the presentation, just in case anybody does have any questions about resumes, cover letters, or just generically applying to jobs in these difficult times. Feel free to reach out. Yes, just go ahead and send me an email. Great, thank you guys.